Now, we have said many times that growth has been slowing down for a long time in Europe. But we've ignored it. I would say until 2 years ago, we would never have such a conversation as the one we're having today. Because things were sort of going well. We were doing well out of globalization. Unemployment was steadily falling. And now we cannot ignore it any longer. Now conditions have changed. World trade is slowing. China is actually slowing very much, but it's become much less open to us, and actually it's competing with us in global markets on all accounts. We've lost our main supplier of cheap energy, Russia, and now we have to start for our defense again for the first time since the Second World War. At the
Greetings, everyone. Now, the European Union recently came out to publish a report, and that report was given to the former Prime Minister of Italy, who is also the former president of the European Central Bank. Now, in that report, he made some serious observations, and on account, of course, of the slow growth of the European economy. But to be honest, the European economy is not really doing that bad. And the fact that these guys are concerned about their economy needed us as Africans also, on one hand, to reflect and examine how are we doing ourselves. Because the purpose of today is, of course, to talk about the African economy. And that is the topic for today. While Europe is looking at its economy, I want us to talk about the African economy, because that is what I'm much more concerned about as an African. Now, in this report, which is called European Competitiveness, the former Prime Minister of Italy, who I said again is the former president of the European Central Bank, mentioned that Europe requires an investment of around 800 billion euros every year to boost its economy to come back to growth. On the other hand, also we have China. We have China, which has been, of course, in one way or another, growing very well. It has been growing very well, but it is not meeting the targets of 5% which it has set, and it has been concerned. So China has decided to boost its economy also, so that they can come back to growth. But let us go back to the European Union and see what they are saying. In this report, in a report on EU competitiveness, which is the European Union, the former ECB or European Central Bank chief Mario Draghi proposes radical change to counter aggressive competition from China and the United States. He taunts the use of joint EU borrowing and other controversial measures. Of course, they call them controversial measures. He urged the EU leaders to invest about 800 billion euros, which is approximately $900 billion annually, to boost growth. The report has also demanded radical change amidst growing concern over massive productivity gap with the United States, where since 2000 incomes have grown, twice. Okay. The report also demanded radical change amidst growing concern over massive productivity gap with the United States, where since 2000 incomes have grown twice as much as the EU. So in the United States, the incomes have doubled compared to the EU. Okay, they have grown twice as the EU. Let us look at this European economy, of course, where they are concerned. What is this European economy? We know that Europe, of course, they're even talking about productivity, that their productivity is low. But when you look at Europe, it's, industrial output, as a share of global output is around 19.7%. That is the industrial output, percentage of industrial output of the global economy. Of course, China is at around 30% of global output, and Africa, on the other hand, of course, is at 1.9. Our productivity is very low. Europe has about 750 million people. Okay, 750 million people, and its economy is bigger, is even much bigger than ours. Is approximately 17 trillion dollars. Europe's economy is 17.1 trillion dollars. So if anyone has to really be concerned, I think that it is the Africans who are supposed to be concerned. We are supposed to be concerned, and of course, as a concerned African, which I believe also you as an African or African American or African diaspora, you also have to be concerned. We need to come up with some recommendations, some suggestions, because to be honest, our continent, where it is going in completely wrong direction. Okay, regardless of the successes that have been achieved in the various countries, whether you're talking about Botswana, which is a very small country that is just around 4 to 5 million people, which is insignificant compared to a continent of 1.4 billion people. You see, so you talk about countries like Mauritius, which are very small countries. So you can see that the development or the successes of the various countries on the African continent, like Seychelles, Mauritius and Botswana, is insignificant compared to what is required to be done on the African continent. So I conclude that this is not good for Africa, and Africa is going in the wrong direction. Because look, an economy of $17 trillion, which is the European economy, and that is sharing, it has a share of industrial production, global industrial production of up to 19%, almost going to 20%, is concerned that there is not enough growth. All right. So what of us as Africans? And of course, after us watching the speech by Mario Draghi, I'll come back with some recommendation. I'm going to come with some recommendations, seriously, on a very serious note. I'm going to come with recommendations, especially as regards to the African economy, and I'm going to make some suggestions. But let us listen to Mario Draghi and what he is concerned about the European economy.
At the same time, this is the first year when Europe cannot count on population growth for its increase, and population is set to decline steadily, so much that by 2040 there will be 2 million workers disappearing from the labor market every year. So now more than ever we have to lean on productivity, but productivity is weak. It's very weak. So if we were to maintain our current average productivity of the last 10 years, say, it would only be enough to keep GDP constant until 2050.
So what is surprising really is that he's talking about population, of course, which is visible. We can see that the European economy, of course, is facing challenges when it comes to population. There's a low birth rate in Europe, and that is why, of course, they have been allowing in some immigrants. Some of these societies rely on immigrants, importing labor, highly skilled labor, especially from African countries and all the other Asian countries which have a lot of population. But what he's saying is that they have to rely on productivity. Already their productivity, of course, is very high compared to the African continent. And of course, they have a low population of 750 million people, which is twice as less. Their population is twice as less as that, on the African continent, which is 1.4 billion people. But he spoke about productivity, that their productivity is low. They are concerned about productivity, and their productivity is 20% of global output. All right, the productivity is 20% of global output. Mind you, And their share, of course, of global population, is just around 9%. 9%. All right? Their share of global population is just 9%, but they are still concerned, that there is no production, that the productivity is low. They are not able to compete. And of course, he spoke about China, the fact that China is competing on the other side. And of course, this speaks to the automobile industry, because China has been producing, and they have been counting on the Chinese market, that now China is competing with them in their own market. Of course, he said that China is competing with us in the markets which we were competing with it. They are talking about the Chinese market because China is the biggest automobile market in the world. Now, China is producing its own vehicles. So Europe now is facing challenges in that regard. But even with all its challenges, Europe is not in the same situation as us as Africans. As Africans, we are in a very, very bad situation. We have 18% of global population, yet our output is just 1.9%. In 1970, it was 1%. All right, global industrial output. If you're talking about the economy, we are less than, our global output is less than 3%. If you look at our GDP, which is just around $3.5 trillion, all right, it's just less than 3% of global output. Global output, we have about 105 trillion dollars, and our share is just 3.5 trillion. So we are still very low compared to them. Our output is extremely small. Their economy is around $17.1 trillion. So that's huge. They already have a huge share, almost of up to 16% of global output. With the population, mind you, with a population of just 9% of global population, they have almost 16% of global output. So this should be a point of concern for us as Africans. And as I said, I'm going to make some recommendations when I come.
But we have, with this slowing growth, low productivity, our needs are actually rising. And they are rising because we have set a series of ambitions that we think are very important. Decarbonization, digitalization, strengthening our defense, and first and foremost, and I made sure that this was clear since the beginning of this report, we want to preserve our social model. But the investment needs that all this entails are massive. The investment share will have to rise by around 5 percentage points of GDP to levels last seen in the 60s and the 70s. I always like to make a comparison. The additional investment provided by the Marshall Plan between 48 and 51 amounted to 2% of GDP. But why do we care so much about all this? That's one question I ask. Why do we care so much about growing? Yes, we have to finance these needs. And these needs are important. But why are they so important? Well, they are important because they have to do with our founding values. Europe is a land, a continent where our values, the European Union, values are prosperity, equity, freedom, peace, and democracy in a sustainable world. And the EU exists to ensure the Europeans that they actually will benefit from these fundamental rights. And if Europe can no longer provide them to its people, it will have lost its reason for being. And the values that I mentioned before, like climate and growth, are intimately related to our founding values. That's why what we are trying to do now becomes existential itself. And that's why we care so much. And that's why the report will argue for what I defined in a speech, a radical change, which will have to be urgent and concrete. I would say I was thinking this morning about which two words would capture the essence of this report is urgency and concreteness.
So, as you are seeing, what Mario Draghi is talking about, that this has to be urgent and concrete, radical. You look at the words he's using: radical, urgent, and concrete. So, this then, as an African, should push you to reflect and think, what of us as Africans on the continent, what are we doing about our situation? Because these guys are painting the situation as if it is dire, it's a very bad situation. But then what of us who have just 1.9% share of global output, who are producing below capacity? Because to be honest, if we were producing to our own capacity, to the capacity of our population, our GDP as Africa should be around $18 trillion. All right? It should be around $18 trillion. That is what our economy should be as Africans. Now, today is $3.5 trillion because our share of global population is 18. All right? Is 18 billion. I mean, is 18%. Sorry. 1.4 billion people is 18% of global population. So if we are producing to our output, like I told you, Europe, its share of global population is just 9%. A simple 9%. But their output is so huge that is at 18%. All right? 16 to 18%. So this should cause concern to all Africans. And if you are out there and you are an African and you are not concerned, you should start being concerned about where we are supposed to go, where we are supposed to be as Africans, and what we are supposed to do. Because, to be honest, what is being done on the African continent is wrong. They are doing all the wrong things. The heads of state are doing all the wrong things. Okay? They are doing all the wrong things. These people are talking about stimulus, stimulating their economy. As you are seeing in China, they are stimulating their economy. But in Africa, you never hear about stimulus. Okay? In Africa, it's like they have resigned, the heads of state have resigned themselves to about 2 or 3 sources of stimulating the economy. One, taxation. And even these taxes, they are nonsensical taxes. Most of the taxes which they impose on the people, they are nonsensical. They are pumped up by the International Monetary Fund. 2, borrowing from the International Monetary Fund. What else is there? In foreign direct investment. Now, when it comes to foreign direct investment, when it comes to foreign direct investment on the global stage, we are taking crumbs, the leftovers. But the real high-value investment, it goes to European countries and China, and now some of it is going to India and Asia. It doesn't come to us. You've never seen that Tesla has come to put up a factory in Africa of around $5 billion. You've never had something like that. But they go and put it in China, and in a period of 6 months, they have built it up. So, this tells you that what the heads of state are doing on the African continent, of looking at only these sources, so-called foreign direct investment, which is not coming on the African continent. 2, taxation, and 3, borrowing from the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Which World Bank and International Monetary Fund, their loans are predatory. Recently when the World Bank organized a summit in Nairobi with Ruto, President Museveni spoke and said that the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund have been engaging in what he called the predatory lending, or what he called the profiteering. This is basically predatory lending. And we have seen this, even Dr. Chombori Kwao complaining about it, that and other African thinkers, serious African thinkers, who have said that these people are lending to Africa, someone who needs the money, they are lending him at 9%, 7 to 9%. And the West, which doesn't need money, they lend to them at 2%, at 4%. So, which means that it is the same West which is making profit off these loans. So the loans themselves, they are for making profit for Europe so that Europe can continue to be rich. So this is not a source of financing itself, but it is a trap. It is a means of trapping you further so that you will not grow, or you will not focus your, you will not focus your economy or your investments, your own internal investments, onto sectors which are serious and are going to stimulate your economy to grow, but rather you are using the funds even which you are gathering or you are collecting from your own economy to give it to Europeans as interest. And we have seen that Africa is paying huge interest than health combined, health, education, and others combined. This is how much interest rate Africa is paying on loans which are going outside. So now there's no money for investing in important sectors like transportation, communication, and energy. There's no money, you see. So it tells you again that the heads of state are doing the wrong thing. The African heads of state are not doing the right thing. They are doing all the wrong things. Completely wrong. They are doing the wrong things. So we have to suggest a new way. We have to propose a new way of approaching the African economy, because to be honest, we have to compete with the rest of the globe. We have to compete with the rest of the globe. That's how it is. The field has sort of been leveled. When it comes to knowledge, we are consuming the same knowledge. So there's no excuse why these guys should come around and exploit us. There's no excuse why these guys should come around and be parasites to feed on us. Okay? We should not be a host, a perpetual host for these guys, for them to continue to grow perpetually. But rather we have now to approach the African economy in a new way, which will help us to grow and look after our next generations. Because these guys are concerned about the next generations, their own next generations. So, and that is the truth. All right, let us continue to listen to Mario Draghi and what he is saying.
This report presents a new industrial strategy for Europe, based around three main areas for action. By the way, this report is granular. It's concrete, as I said, it's granular. It contains around 170 sort of proposals. If we only look at the general proposal, then there will be sub-proposals of different kinds. Let me also reassure you, we are not starting from zero. That's why we have hope, a founded hope of being able to do what this report argues for. We have strong education, we have a healthcare system that works, as I said, we have good welfare system, and then we have lots of specific strengths, talent, and here I come to the very first driving line of this report. Namely, we want to aim at closing the innovation gap with the United States. Innovation is the first pillar of the report. Europe is nowadays stuck in a static industrial structure, populated by mid-technology companies, which are already mature. The leading firms in research and investment spending are the same ones we had 20 years ago.
Now, if you look at what he's saying, research, how important it is, research. Of course, research and innovation is the same. And this is very important because, of course, research is normally done by the smartest in your society, the smartest people you have in your society. And, of course, that this is where education, is very important. And he said that they already have a good education system. They have a good healthcare system. They're not starting from zero. And most of these things, of course, in Africa are not present. We have a good education system on the African continent when it comes to our literacy rate, for example, is up to 70%. Our literacy rate is up to 70%. But of course, the quality then is where it comes in. We have a problem of quality, that not that we can't produce quality or we don't produce quality, we do. But now the problem which we have on the African continent, which is a major problem, is the brain drain. Now we have these countries now, they are extracting the smartest of Africans from the African continent. And of course, it's unfortunate that, they are going, and we see that most of the times, even our local media platforms, they celebrate when our smartest have gone out, whether it is students, those ones who have been the best in their classes, and they have been invited, or they are invited to Harvard or Oxford or Cambridge, all these institutions, to go and study there. Of course, our media platforms, most of the times, they celebrate something, of course, that should not be celebrated. And so this is a problem. We have a big problem. We have a psychological problem in itself, and then we have the problem itself of brain drain. And of course, this also is coming on the back of poor policies by the heads of state, that they are focusing on the wrong things. In Africa, on the African continent, the heads of state are focusing on the wrong things, completely wrong things. And I'm not going to stop saying that. I'm not going to stop saying this. These guys are practicing the wrong things. They are focusing on the wrong things, and we need to straighten them. And that straightening, it means that we have to propose a new way of running the African economy. We have to propose a new way of running the African economy. All right? Because we want to have researchers, we want to have innovators on the African continent. Okay? We have to do this. So regardless of what has been achieved in Rwanda, or what has been achieved in Uganda, or whatever it is, because some of these guys may say, oh, I'm doing the best, in my part I'm doing my best. It is not enough. It is not enough. And this means that we have to do it on scale. Whatever we do on the African continent, we have to do it on scale. We have to do it at scale. Okay? For us to be able to compete with the rest of the world, everything has to be done at scale. What Rwanda is doing, however much success it is having, is not enough. It is not enough for the whole African continent. It is not enough, because Rwanda alone cannot lift Africa's productivity, even though it can contribute. But the era in which we are, everything has to be fast, everything has to be massive, everything has to be at scale and rapid, fast, quickly. Look at China, what they are doing when it comes to the production of automobiles. It is like almost every month, if you look at BYD, it's like almost every month, BYD is putting out a new model of electric vehicle, a new model of hybrid, plug-in hybrid vehicle. So this is the new type of manufacturing that we have to approach. This is the new way of manufacturing that we have to look at. So let us continue. Let us continue as we break down this speech, and of course, with the focus on Africa, what is the benefit that is in it for Africa, and why we need to pay attention to what is going on across the globe.
Autos, cars. In the United States, used to be the same. Autos and pharma 20 years ago, but now it's all digital at the top. The problem is not that we lack smart people, and we don't lack certainly good ideas, but there are too many barriers to commercializing innovations and scaling them up in the European Union. Just let me give you one number. Since 2008, close to 30% of the so-called unicorns, namely companies that will go to be valued more than 1 billion euros, unicorns that had started in the European Union have left, and the majority of them went to the United States. So 30% of our most successful innovators have moved. And this has to change. Europe must become a place where innovation flourishes, especially for digital tech. And a weak.
Now, you see what he's talking about. This is why it is important now to have your own corporations. And of course, I understand when we speak about this, those revolutionaries, people who talk about, of course, socialism, and of course they talk about, and capitalism. But the truth is, the world in which we are living, you have to have your own corporations. They have to compete. You have to compete. You have to have your own Volkswagen on the African continent. You have to have your own Mercedes-Benz. You have to have your own energy manufacturing facilities. And this is why the Europeans are very concerned with the fact that Dangote has started production of oil, the refining of oil. And they are using their minions within Nigeria. They are using their puppets within Nigeria to sabotage the refinery, because they know that this is an existential threat. And of course, he has also mentioned it. Their economy already is in a good position, but the man has already said that it is an existential threat. Okay? Remember, these guys have more than global output. Their global output is around 16%. 16 to 17%. But they are saying it is an existential threat, the fact that their economy has slowed down. So if they are saying that this is an existential threat, then we Africans, what should we be doing? We should be committing suicide. We should be saying that we are dead. We should be running around across the continent to fix things. But are you seeing any of this on the African continent? No, not anywhere. Not anywhere on the African continent. And the African heads of state are waking up, and their ministers and their public servants, they are waking up every day to go to work as if it is normal. And what is more painful even on the African continent is that there is no one who cares about this continent. These people don't care about this continent to say the whole continent. We need to look at the whole continent. It is not enough to look at the individual states. No one is looking at Africa's GDP and say, why are we growing? Why are we slowing down? For example, we have slowed down. Africa's GDP has slowed down to 3.4%, which is unsustainable. It is not sustainable for people who are producing below capacity. Our economy should be at around $18 trillion. We are at 3.5. For us to be as productive as our population, productivity to equal our population, we should be at 18.5. But this is an emergency. These guys are producing twice their population, but they are saying that it is an existential threat. What they are facing an existential threat. What of us who are producing, how many times? 6 times below our capacity. 6 times below our capacity. Africa is producing 6 times below our capacity. So we should be worried. Africa, we should be worried. We should wake up and we are worried. But people are not worried. Our youth have been left to watch European football while they increase the productivity of Europe. Every time you watch European football, you are increasing productivity in Europe. Our youth are twerking. Our media is focusing on things which don't benefit the African continent at all. And we should be worried. As Africans, we should be worried. We should be worried. We should be some of us, we should be committing suicide, because what is happening on the African continent is worse. Is very bad. Is bad. Bad is completely bad. That is happening on the African continent. But nobody cares. Unfortunately, nobody cares. So the companies, the manufacturing companies, we are supposed to have them as Africans. We are supposed to have our own manufacturing companies. We are supposed to have our own technology companies. We have a continent is dominated by the United States companies. Whether you're talking about the internet, the fiber optic cable, which are bringing internet to the continent, we rely on Europe and the United States. The applications, whether you're talking about Google, China, they have their own. Why do you think they built their own? Even though they were being insulted that they are a closed society and what? They have now their own satellites, they have their own communication system, they have their own energy systems. They don't wait for Europeans to come and invest in their energy system, in their transportation system, in their communication system. These are the most important sectors. How can a country like Ghana or Nigeria now invite Chevron to come and take over the energy sector? Nigeria invited Chevron, Shell, ExxonMobil, these companies, Total, to come and take over the energy sector, which is a key sector in the development of an economy. And the same thing with Ghana, the same thing with Uganda, the same thing with South Africa. So how do you expect it to grow? How do you expect to industrialize if you don't have transportation, if you don't have, energy, you don't have control over your energy, you don't have control over your communication system, you don't have a control over your transportation system? How do you expect to grow? You don't have control over your agriculture. You are a net importer of food. How do you expect it to grow? How do you expect it to industrialize with this approach? So, and this is our state. This is our current state as the African continent. And this has to change. This has to change, and we have to propose a new way. And the group I belong to, which is the African Continental Unity Party, is boldly proposing a new way of looking at the African continent and the African economy for it to grow rapidly. Because what is happening is suicide. What is happening on the African continent today is suicide, and is very dangerous. Is completely dangerous. Is not only dangerous to this generation that is living or that is coming to take over from the current leadership, but it is even dangerous to our children that are coming, even our grandchildren and the next generation. What is happening on the African continent, that's how dangerous it is. Okay? So let us continue to listen to Mario Draghi.
Sector, we should be aware of that, will not only rob us of the growth opportunities of the coming AI revolution, will also hinder innovation in our traditional sectors, so it will hamper their competitiveness. The second area is what the President mentioned before, and it's combining decarbonization with competitiveness. Namely, let me give you the bottom line of this. We want decarbonization to be a source of growth. If all policies are in sync with our climate goals, and as we will see later in our conversation, it's a big if. Decarbonization will be an opportunity for growth. But if we fail to coordinate, there is a risk that decarbonization could run contrary to competitiveness and growth.
Now, here is the problem. Here is the problem. So you see these guys, what they are saying, that their decarbonization should be a source of growth. What basically is saying is that the tools or the equipment that they are going to use in the decarbonization process, and of course he's talking about solar panels, he's talking about the manufacturing of wind turbines. If you are going to transfer to these, then they should be manufactured in Europe. That is basically what he means. They should be a source of growth. If it is not that, then they should not attempt that decarbonization. All right? But these are the same people who are sponsoring some of our stupid elements within our society, so that these stupid elements, some of the stupid Africans, so that they can rise up and demonstrate and oppose facilities like the East African oil pipeline. All right, we have seen some stupid boys and girls who are sponsored by Europe, and they are demonstrating against the East African oil pipeline. And we have seen European NGOs trying to bribe people like David Hundein, who is a Nigerian journalist, to try to write pieces which incriminate or which speak bad about the Dangote oil refinery. These are the people who are telling us these things. These are the people who are pushing decarbonization into the African continent, while they themselves, they are handling it in a manner which will bring growth to their society. And of course, this should be concern. This should be a point of concern to us as Africans. And the question that we should ask even today is, do the African heads of state listen to these things? Do they listen, to this information? Because now this information is no more hidden. We are not in the 60s where this information, they are holding this information and they are talking about it and you can't have access to it. So the question is, do African heads of state listen to what these Europeans are planning and integrate it into how Africa is also going to grow? because it is not hard to copy. But if you cannot even copy, if you cannot copy others to integrate it in your economy, how your economy is growing, where you want it to grow, then you don't know what you are doing. And that is why I said that the African economy, the way it is being run in the wrong way, and they are focusing completely on the wrong things. Completely on the wrong things. What they are doing, whether it is Tinubu, all these puppets, Nanado, Ruto, these are complete puppets who don't know what they are doing. They're just destroying the African economy. And that is what we are not growing. That is why we are not growing. That is why we are in trouble. We are in complete trouble. All right? We are in complete trouble. Because these guys are saying they are facing an existential challenge. Europe's economy faces existential challenge. So what of Africa? What should we be saying? If Europe is facing an existential challenge, what should Africa be saying? Okay? We are already in a pit. We are already in a shithole, like how Trump used to say. And nobody cares. Nobody is saying anything.
Have an opportunity to lower our energy prices. Let me just say that once we look deeply at our energy market, we see a market that's been still designed for at a time where natural gas and fossil fuels were the most important component of the energy mix. Now it's not so any longer. Natural gas in 2022, even though being roughly 20% of the energy mix, set the price 60% of the times. It's a market that, thanks to long-term contracts, but also other things, it's really dominated, I think, by vested interests. It's a market that is also burdened by financial rents. And it's a market that's become a cash cow for national budgets, for member states' budgets. Taxation on energy is one of the highest in the world, if not the highest. So all this bottoms down to the fact.
So you can see what this guy is talking about, that taxation and the energy sector have been the cash cow for them, the energy sector. And he's talking about oil and gas. And which oil and gas have these guys been consuming? And of course, their corporations, they are the ones which go forth. And that's why I've been telling you that as Africa, we have to grow our own corporation. This behavior, we have to grow our own companies and corporations, because these corporations, they're the ones which go out there and bring the wealth for you. And that is why you see East India Company. British had East India Company. The Dutch East India Company also. We have the British East India Company. All right? We have I think East Africa was called what by the British, and West Africa, Nigeria was a company. These companies used to go out there and bring wealth. And so this is what he's talking about. So their growth has been coming from taxation and energy. But where has that energy been coming from? Of course, they are taking energy from Africa. They are taking cheap energy from Africa. Bad contracts. They are called even contracts. But it's robbery. It's complete robbery. This is why they have been starting wars in the Middle East, to take other people's resources. This is the industry that he's talking about. So Africa's economy has to be restructured, has completely to be restructured. It has to be restructured completely. Where it is in a wrong direction. Africa's economy is going completely in the wrong directions. We have to focus on the fundamentals. If we don't focus on the fundamentals and we build them strongly, there's no way we can talk about industrialization, and hence there's no way we can talk about the African Continental Free Trade Area. What are you going to trade if you are not producing, if you don't have industries? And where are you going to put the industries if you don't have the fundamentals? And those are the fundamentals that we want to talk about as our recommendations.
But we are not able to transfer the benefits of less costly energy produced by the renewables to our consumers, both households and industry. So we have to have in place a plan that first and foremost aims at decoupling the price of fossil fuel energy from clean energy sources so that end users see the benefits of decarbonization in their bills. But there's also another side to this consistency in our climate policy, and that is the providing the clean technologies to enable decarbonization. You know, what we have to do is really to increase the supply of clean energy. And to do that, we not only have to, as we've done through regulation and standards, look at consumption, demand, but also we have to increase supply. To some extent, that's what IRA is doing. In the United States, there are many standards or many prohibitions. What is there? It's just a lot of incentives for increasing production. Also, our clean tech industry now faces a competition with China. And certainly China could offer the cheapest route to meeting the EU's climate targets. But China's state-sponsored competition represents a threat to developing our productive clean industries. That's why we want decarbonization to become a source of growth. We have to look at all these sides. It's very important for our planet, but also to be important as a source of growth, we need a joint plan spanning industries that produce energy and those that enable decarbonization, such as clean tech and automotives.
So I always say that one of the achievements of Obasanjo in Nigeria, and of course other people have disputed this, is that he was able to create some billionaires in Nigeria, and of course including Dangote. They were able to create some billionaires. Now this is very important. It is very important because you need your own corporations to compete. You need your own corporations to compete with the world. If you don't have your own corporations to go out there and bring the wealth or to build your own economy, then you're going to be in trouble. And that is the situation that Africa is facing, because the narrative of privatization was used by those who already have these corporations, and those corporations have been coming to gobble up Africa's assets. And so we see people, stupid people like President Ruto, inviting the Indians to come and take over an airport. We see people like Samia Suluhu inviting Indians to come and take over ports. So Africa's assets, these people have absolved themselves of responsibility of taking care of Africa's assets, and they just give them out to foreigners. And these guys are going to enrich their societies. They are taking the wealth to enrich India. They are not taking the wealth to enrich you. They are using the assets and making profit to enrich themselves. So the United States, this is what it has been doing. Europe, this is what they have been doing. That is why you see that their corporations are dominating our mining industries on the African continent. They are dominating the mining industry on the African continent, the oil industry, the energy industry on the African continent. They even take over dams, energy systems on the African continent. Have you ever seen anything like this in China? This is ridiculous. This is completely ridiculous. Okay, so they are talking about growing with decarbonization on their terms. Decarbonization is supposed to be a source of growth. And of course, they are seeing the concern of China, that China is able to produce more than them. And they don't give a damn what the climate change is. The only thing they give a damn about is growth, the improvement of their economy. Yet it's the same people who don't care about our economy on the African continent. They come here and they tell us about, climate change and decarbonization. The United States, more than 132 refineries, oil refineries. It has never closed a single one. It has not even closed. But it is coming to tell us that we should decarbonize. Why not close half of your refineries in the United States before you tell us to decarbonize? So you see where the problem is. So they are concerned about China to the point that they are saying that it has to be China is a threat because China is producing the energy equipment which they need to decarbonize. But they say they will reject those energy equipment if they are not a source of growth of their economy. But in Africa, we are going in the opposite direction. We are doing opposite things which are detrimental. You see in Nigeria, they are attacking the Dangote oil refinery instead of repairing the other 4 refineries in Nigeria so that they can produce oil, refined oil for the whole African continent. They are instead sabotaging the Dangote oil refinery. Have you ever seen anybody stupid like this? This is just incredible. This is absolute stupidity that is happening on the African continent. And these guys are encouraging it. These guys are encouraging because they planted puppets like Tinubu over there into power. So they push him and encourage this stupidity, which sabotages the African economy. And the other African heads of state are sitting on their behinds. They are sitting on their butts, doing nothing. They are just over there sitting on their butts. So this is where I say that a new direction is needed, and that new direction has to be implemented. And our African Continental Unity Party is proposing a completely new way of looking at the African economy, because it has to grow. Africa's economy has to grow to 6 times to where it is right now. 6 times. That is when we will match our level of productivity with our level of population. So the African economy has to grow 6 times, up to $18 trillion.
The third area of this report is increasing security and reducing dependencies. As the era of geopolitical stability fades, we have matured to two basic sets of dependencies. One are the economic dependencies. The raw materials we use in all our productions are in the hands of a few suppliers. And then we have security dependencies, given that the geopolitics has considerably worsened in the last 10 years. So all we have to develop is a foreign economic policy here, coordinating preferential trade agreements and direct investments with resource-rich countries, building up stockpiles in selected critical areas, and creating industrial partnerships to secure the supply chain for key technologies. And we need to build our defense industrial capacity. Of course, many of these goals are not new. Member states are actually doing this on their own. But in so doing, we are really, in a sense, punching under our power. We could do much more if all these things were done as if we acted as a community. But we lack focus on key priorities. We don't combine our resources to generate scale, and we do not coordinate the policies that matter. So in each of these areas, the report identifies the root causes of the EU's weakening position, focusing on key strategic sectors and key horizontal policies. And we lay out a series of proposals to restore the EU's competitive strength, and we organize all this according to priority. We are not presenting a vision of Europe for the future. Well, we may also do that, certainly. But most of the proposals are designed to be implemented quickly to make a tangible difference to the EU's prospects. Finally, to carry out all this strategy, 2 big questions have to be answered. First, how can we finance such massive investment needs? And second, how can we coordinate policies in a new way?
Web scraping is the easiest way to access useful data at scale, but
well, you know, when we start discussing, I take a few more minutes, Madam President. when we started discussing all these investment needs, then naturally some of the participants in the discussion were macroeconomists, not micro. So they naturally asked, but don't you think that such a big step up in investment would simply destabilize the economy, the European economy? We never had it, as I said a few minutes ago. So what we did was to ask the IMF, the research department of the IMF, and the European Commission to run 2 independent simulations of a step up of this size. What would it do to the European economy? Would it be possible? And basically, we came out with the simulations are slightly different, but they basically come to the same conclusion. This investment is possible, but it's unlikely. Oh, by the way, we assume that Europe will move and capital market union will proceed and will make progress, so we can mobilize private investment. But it's unlikely that private investment alone will be able to finance such investment needs without assuming conditions that would destabilize the European economy.
Now, here's the scenario. So now this is the hypocrisy, of course. At first, he spoke about the Chinese economy, and he said that the Chinese economy is funded by the state. Now, at the same time, he's saying that the UN figures by the International Monetary Fund, the simulation, and they said that this growth which they want to achieve will not be achievable. Which they want to get will not be achievable if it's only the private sector. Therefore, what he's saying is that the state has to intervene and invest. The state has to intervene and invest. And this is what even the United States they are doing. The state is at the center. In China, of course, he has already mentioned that China is this is what he's doing. So he's looking like an hypocrite. He's a complete hypocrite. Okay? On one side, they are in Africa where they are talking to us about the private sector. Give it to the private sector. And you have heard this. You have heard people like Nanado, Akufado. They are talking about the private sector. Private sector this, private sector that. But the guys who are telling you private sector this, private sector that, leave it to the private sector. It's private sector-led growth. These guys are saying that the private sector will not be able to do it. This is what the guy is saying. And these are the guys who are pumping us. And it is even the International Monetary Fund who told them after running the figures in a simulation. And they're saying that the private sector will not be doing. Now, the so-called IMF is coming to Africa and telling us that the private sector, stupid people like Ruto, they are leaving the things, the puppet Ruto is selling the airport. You see? So this is where we have a problem. We have a huge problem on the African continent. We have a huge problem, and the continent has to go in a different direction. The continent has to shift and move in a different direction. All right. Of course, the recommendation, of course, which he gave, is for them to invest. Is for them to invest up to 800. That's up to $900 billion. That's how much they're going to invest. $900 billion is what they are going to invest. Now, the other thing, of course, which he said that is that they have to do it together. Because if you do it alone, the individual states, the individual European states, European states will not be able to, they will be punching below. They are saying that we have to do it together so that we can punch above the weight. Now, is this happening on the African continent? Is this analysis also happening on the African continent? It is not happening. And so, this is one of the failures of the African continent, of the African heads of state, actually, not the African continent, but the African heads of state. This is one of the failures. That these guys are moving in a unified direction. Already they have a single currency, which is the euro. They are already moving together. They are doing a lot of things together. When they are negotiating with our small countries, they negotiate and overwhelm our countries. Look at Kenya was negotiating with the European Union alone when the East African community is not there. They negotiate with this huge entity which has $17 trillion, and you just have about $80 billion of economy. So they will overwhelm your economy and dump everything inside. Your economy dump agricultural produce. We saw that KFC was importing potatoes from Europe into Kenya when East Africa is producing a lot of potato. Have you ever seen this kind of stupidity by heads of state? And it is disturbing. Now, what does this mean? What are our suggestions? Our suggestions is that the continent now has to move in a different direction. These heads of state who are misleading the continent, who are moving the continent in the wrong direction, one, they have to be moved. They have to be removed. These guys have to be removed from the heading of the continent, from the leadership of the continent. That is number one. Number two, focus. There is focus. We are supposed to focus on the fundamentals as a continent, because from these fundamentals is where we get industrialization, and is where we get the products which are going to be produced. Is where production comes from. Industrialization is where production is going to come. Of course, even if you talk about agriculture, the mechanization of agriculture, that is industrialization in itself. And this industrialization, including other goods, machinery, is where productivity is going to come from and produce the goods, which goods you're going to trade on the African continent and compete with the rest of the world. But what are these fundamentals that we are talking about? We are talking about an integrated railway platform. You have heard what the guy said. You have heard what Mario Draghi said, that if you are doing alone, you will be punching below your weight. And we have consistently spoken about this, that Africa combined together, it has a GDP of $3.5 trillion. $3.5 trillion, the same size of economy as India. But more so as African continent, we have more resources. Our land is 12 times. We have 12 times the resources which India has. Yet we have the same amount of population. So Africa is punching way below our weight. Currently, we are punching 6 times below our weight. 6 times. All right? We are punching 6 times below our weight. So now we are going to start with fixing the fundamentals. Forget about the heads of state who are there. They are the problems who are holding the continent back. Because their actions are the ones which are allowing imperialism to fester and move all over the continent and take over the continent. It's the actions of the heads of state. It's nobody else. These are the two biggest problems, imperialism and the heads of state, the African heads of state. So they have to be fought and removed from power and unify the continent so that the continent can go in a single direction. Now, we need then to solve the fundamentals. What are the fundamentals? We have to build a continental railway platform to transport those goods that are going to be produced. Number two, we have to approach the energy problem on the African continent. We have seen that South Africa too is suffering from energy issues. We have to approach the energy issue, the solving of the energy issue, the energy problem as a unity. All right? And that means that we start with building the Inga Dam in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We start by building that because it's going to produce about 20% and serve about 20% of the continent with the energy, because we have about 600 million people on the African continent without access to energy. So how do you then expect it to grow? How do you expect it then to put up your productivity if these people don't have access to energy? So that is number two. And the energy, the railway platform, an integrated railway platform all over the African continent. And this railway platform will come with an integrated communication platform with a fiber optic cable around the railway network that we are talking about, that we are going to be building. And this is the position of the African Continental Unity Party. So, number one, the railway platform. Number two, the communication platform that is going to come with the railway platform. Number three is the fixing of the energy problem and building the Inga Dam, and building also about 4 other nuclear power plants, mega nuclear power plants in the north, in the south, in the west, and in the east, to provide energy to majority of the African people. This, I believe, is the approach. And of course, approaching agriculture in a planned manner as Africans, so that we can grow our food where the land is fertile and maximize those areas where the land is fertile, so that we can stop importing this food. And then, if we take care of these 4 structural sectors, these foundational sectors, which is transport, energy, communication, and agriculture, if we lay the foundation of these, we will have laid the foundation for industrialization as Africans. We will have laid the foundation for industrialization. And steel and all these other sectors. The system will have been laid and productivity will skyrocket on the African continent. So a new way has to be thought about when we talk about how the African continent should grow going forward. We have seen what the Europeans are doing. We have seen the Chinese what they are doing. We have seen what the United States are doing. They are using the power of the state, the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act. All this is the power of the state in the United States. We have seen the power of the state in China. We are seeing the power of the state even in Europe. These hypocrites who are claiming, who are always worrying us and telling us this is the private sector. They are using the power of the state. So these are the important things that we need to think about as Africans. The next generation, especially the next generation of Africans, has to move the continent in a different direction. And this responsibility has to be embraced in all its entirety. The responsibility has to be embraced in its entirety by this next generation of Africans. My name is Kwame Gonza and the channel is called Connect Africa and Africa Reimagined. Let me know what you think, but these are my thoughts on this report by the European Union and where the African continent should be going currently. Thank you so much. Thank you, and thank you for supporting the channel. Please support us in our PayPal and also support us in our Super Chat as we move forward, so that we can continue to contribute to our continent and build it, and we must build it within this generation. As we said, we must make a contribution because every generation must find its mission and fulfill it or betray it. And I believe that as this generation, we are going to fulfill our mission, which was given to us as we contribute to the work of our ancestors and what they started. Thank you so much. And my name is Kwame Gonza. Peace. I'll talk to you later.